With more than 16,000 bodies of water,
Our lakes are precious, and they belong to all of us.
Wisconsin is a liquid playground.
It's an important state to the recreational boating industry.
But an emerging sport
There you go, bro.
is making waves across the Badger State.
They damage the environment, destroy personal property, and erode the shoreline.
This week on Open Record,
The new kids are on the block now.
a water fight is breaking out.
Is there a way for everyone to be happy here?
Almost certainly not.
Over the new kings of the lake. From the FOX6 Studios, this is Open Record. I'm Brian Polson, and I'm joined this week, as always, by Open Record's executive producer, Sarah Smith. Hey, Sarah.
Hello.
And we are joined by Contact 6 reporter, Jenna Sachs. Hey, Jenna.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Sure.
We are recording this episode on Tuesday, June 18th, for release on Thursday, June 20th. And as we record inside a nice air-conditioned studio, it's what, 90-something
It's muggy.
degrees
Getting
outside?
there.
It's a little muggy. It is a perfect time to enjoy one of Wisconsin's seemingly endless bodies of water. Millions of people enjoy Wisconsin lakes every summer, but there's a growing conflict that is making waves all the way to Madison. And we're going to dive right into that after this. You often hear Minnesota referred to as the land of 10,000 lakes, but according to the Wisconsin DNR, we actually have more, 16,000 recognized bodies of water. So it is safe to say water recreation is a big deal here, right? I mean, fishing, kayaking, paddleboarding, tubing, jet skiing, water skiing, you name it, people do it. But sometimes those lake users run into conflicts with each other. I think back to the 90s, like jet skis. Do you remember when that was so controversial? And now they're everywhere and people have kind of learned to get along. But a new conflict is what prompted this latest investigation.
So how did it start? How did the tip come in?
I've been waiting to tell the story.
I love
You know
that.
I
That's
have
my favorite question in all of these, where it's like, how did you ever figure out that this was a thing?
Because it's actually one of the most common questions. I don't know if you get this too, but we often get the, where do your stories come from?
Yeah.
And you know, they come from all sorts of ways. This
Yeah.
one came about in the most unusual way because I was at the dermatologist's office and I was in my boxers in the waiting room or in the office, and the doctor came, Dr. David
Jenna's
May.
immediately embarrassed.
Imagine me now. I'm in the doctor's office.
Yeah.
Dr. David May. He's a great dermatologist and a great guy. He came in and he said, "Do you take story tips?" And I said, "Have at it. Lay it on me." So he did tell me about, he's a fisherman and he's got a friend, he said, who's an attorney and is part of a nonprofit group that is trying to get restrictions placed on, he said, "Do you know what a wake boat is?" I honestly didn't know what a wake boat was.
I hadn't heard of it
Right,
either.
no.
So if you're not into sport, water sports or powerboat sports, things like that, you probably know what water skiing is. You know what a powerboat is on the water. Wake boats are essentially a little, not necessarily bigger, but some of them are bigger, more powerful, but they're designed in a way to work differently than other powerboats. They're actually designed with extra weight in the rear of the boat that weighs them down. So they kind of plow through the water at an angle and they create big waves.
It's fascinating because I guess in my narrow mind here, I was like, oh, the power boats that pull skiers and tubers, oh, those must be the same. It's not the same. And the explanation of how they collect water in those giant canisters or whatever in the back of the boat, to your point, weigh it down. It's kind of a fascinating concept.
Well, and it really does come with the design of the boat to make this possible. So if you think about being on inland lakes, there aren't a lot of waves. I mean, you'll see small little waves crashing against the shoreline, or if it's a windy day, you might see more. Or if it's really busy and there's a lot of boats on the water, you'll see more activity at the shoreline. But it's not like you're in the ocean where there's 4-foot swells you can surf. I mean, if you're a surfer, you always thought you go to the coasts, right? And that's where you surf. If you're a water skier, sometimes you'll see water skiers kind of jump the wake, right? Because there's a little bit of a wake. But you can't surf those waves. They're still way too small to like surf and just ride along. But these boats are designed to create a constant, steady wave that is tall enough to actually propel a surfer forward. But they have to design the boats in a special way to make that work. And these have become popular in the last 10 or 15 years. And they're becoming more so as time goes on. And they're showing up on a lot of lakes all across the state.
I thought it was interesting in your story that they're popular with certain kinds of people too, maybe older people, because water skiing can be hard on your body.
Yes, and I don't know, the explanation of being like, oh, some of the older people who can't, It
Well,
looks impossible.
I will tell you, this is the interesting thing. I don't know how many older people are wake surfing. I think there are quite a number, in part because the boats are expensive.
Yeah.
These boats they start at 100,000 plus. Some of them are 200,000 or more, depending on just how big the engine is, all the amenities and other things. But these aren't starter boats, right?
Sure.
So you got a little money in your pocket. I think they're attractive to younger people because they like the idea of the sport and doing tricks and other things.
Yeah.
But then I know the industry is saying, hey, this is also really great for you older boaters who have little money and can buy our boats, because it is easier on the body. Wake boats don't go as fast as ski boats. In fact, to get a good steady wave, they tend to go about 11 to 13 miles per hour. So they're plowing through the water at a steady pace. They're creating a nice consistent wave that a person can, you get pulled up like you're on water skis. You got a tow rope.
Yeah, yep.
You get pulled up onto the wakeboard, and then once you're on that wave, toss the rope back in and you just ride the wave.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to go very fast. In fact, if they go too fast, it becomes problematic. So that 11 to 13 miles per hour, if you look at the boats from afar, they don't look like they're screaming through the water.
No.
But they are creating a very big wave. And the real question and the real concern that others are raising is what's happening with those waves after they get away from the boat. How powerful are they? How much energy do they have? And how much disruption are they doing to everybody else?
Well, what kind of problems, is that potentially causing? I mean, I know some of the people that are kind of against all these kind of boats are saying that it's stirring up sediment and jacking up the lake and pond floors and stuff. So what kind of problems?
Well, I think there are levels of concerns here, because first of all, if you forget about the environmental piece for just a minute, there's a lot of different people using the lake. We talk about all the different users. If you're in a kayak and you're trying to kind of navigate a relatively small or medium-sized lake, and then big waves are coming by, practically capsizing you, well, it makes it a little harder to get out and enjoy your kayaking. Or maybe if you're a fisherman who prefers calmer waters, here come the big boats, and they're sending waves that go a long way with a lot of energy, disrupting just sort of your enjoyment.
Or
of the
kids
lake, right?
playing.
Or kids playing. There's a video that I think we might talk a little bit later, but one of these groups that is opposing wake boats has a video from the shore. I think it's Lake Keesis in Waukesha County, and there's a child on a slide at the shoreline, and there's one of those floating piers or whatever, the little floating square docks or whatever that's out there, and you see the waves start to come, and you hear someone yell, "Stay up there, don't go down," because they can tell what's coming. And as those waves get closer to shore, it's shallower, and you know how waves work. That energy builds, and they start to become breakers. And it looks like you're in the ocean, and they start crashing against the bottom of the slide, making that dock, go all over the place. There is potentially, in situations like that, a safety concern if you have small children. So I know the person who took that video has shared it with this Lakes at Stake group that we'll talk about, but one of these groups that opposes these things and wanted that to be seen, to say this is what we're dealing with and this is why we're concerned.
So obviously people have lake homes, and so their homes are right up on the shore there, and so they might have concerns that are different from other people. But is that the only people who should be thinking about kind of the issues?
When I was first invited by this Lakes at Stake group to sit down and talk about this, that was one of my questions is, okay, I get it. You might be a water skier.
Lake home people problem?
Yeah, you have a lake home and you're concerned about it, and these people have $200,000 boats and they want to do it. Is this kind of a first world problem here? Like that none of it, if I'm not a lake user, if I'm not a big recreational guy out on the water, do I care? And they said, well, this is where it goes beyond just the interactions of people on the lake. First of all, they said millions of people use Wisconsin lakes. So this does have broad application because all across the state, it's one of the top industries in Wisconsin. Water recreation, $8 billion a year in economic impact estimated here in Wisconsin. So that's already a big deal. But they said beyond that, the lakes are a public trust. And so lake users of all types are supposed to have access. We're also supposed to care for them. And the opponents, this group, as I said, is called Lakes at Stake. It's a nonprofit that formed recently to raise awareness about the potential concerns of wake boats and try to get restrictions in place. They say they're doing real environmental damage. They say that the boats themselves, because of the way they ride at an angle, that the propulsion system goes down, and if they're in shallower water, can churn up sediment.
Sure.
And mess with fish habitats and things like that. So that'll get the fishermen all upset. And then the waves, the energy of those waves as they go out, they continue with a power and an energy that they say is far greater than traditional ski boats because of the way they're designed. that those waves have energy that when it reaches the shore can stir up sediment and cause issues with the ecosystem and the shoreline there. And then on top of that, something I didn't actually talk about in the story that's going to be airing on Fox 6 News because I just ran out of time. We talked about these boats being designed with ballast tanks. They are tanks that are intended to be filled with lake water so that they can weigh the back of the boat down. Yep. That heavier weight allows them to lift more wave up. But when filling those tanks, they also have to empty the tanks when you get out of the water. Yep. And the tanks, the opponents of wake surfing would say, can't be completely emptied. And so there's always going to be residual lake water. Well, if you then are in, say you're on Big Cedar Lake one day and you say, I'm going over to Pewaukee Lake another day, you may well be transferring invasive species from one lake to another. So that's another concern that's been expressed about these, is the concern of transferring invasive species. Now, I'll tell you, I talked to wake surfers who say a lot of people who own these expensive boats, they don't hop lake to lake. They have a lake house and the boat stays there.
Sure.
But there are certainly people concerned about lake hopping and what that could do with the inability to completely empty out these ballast tanks.
So it's one thing to hear complaints from people about the size of these waves, but it's another to experience it firsthand. Yeah. You were able to do that? Yeah, so Lakes at Stake, we sat down in January and I was introduced to 4 people, 2 water skiers, one is a fisherman, one is a sailor, and they all formed this group. And we talked about the issue, and they showed me videos and they told me all about it, but we looked outside the window and the lake was iced over. And I said, I really need to see this. Right. I need to experience what you're talking about. And they said, well, come back when it's warmer and we'll take you out on the water in a kayak. And we did that on Memorial Day weekend. So it was the first weekend where it was warm enough to get out on the water, where we knew there'd be a lot of other boats on the water. And we went out on Pewaukee Lake, which it's one perspective, but it's only one, because Pewaukee Lake's actually a big lake. Mm-hmm. It's one of the bigger lakes in Wisconsin. And so it's kind of built to withstand more traffic and more waves. But even at that, there are 2 kind of sides to Pewaukee Lake. One is shallower and is closer to like the village of Pewaukee. The other side is much deeper, and wake surfers want deep water. Deeper water gives them better waves. Yeah. So that's where we'd find the wake boats, and we took kayaks out on the water and spent a couple of hours. And as 3 or 4 wake boats got going at the same time, those waves start to build up and accumulate. And there were a couple of times where we had some, little treacherous moments there. It wasn't like I felt scared for my safety, but I think if you are on a smaller lake where this probably has a lot more impact and you're not paying attention or expecting it, I could see where those could be really dangerous, honestly. We're looking for it. We're riding around looking for where are the waves, where are they coming from? I was prepared. You still have that, whoa, hey, that was more than I thought. But if you are trying to enjoy the lake and not expecting what's coming, I could see where that could be something that would be unnerving. Maybe.
Well, and to your earlier point about the waves gaining more power and more energy as they get toward the shoreline, that's where a lot of kayakers and people that are in those vessels,
paddleboards,
that's where they ride. Right, they ride basically the shore, for the most part. And so then to that point of like, that's when the waves come in and you feel them even more than when you're maybe out more in the middle of the lake.
This is, you mentioned that there's the concern about the environmental concerns. There's the concerns that other lake users have because of the waves that are being created. These are concerns that are being shared statewide. And the story has kind of been out there. There's been a lot of people talking to the opponents of wake surfing, but we also wanted to visit with some wake surfers. Mm-hmm. Like, what are they saying? And what is their sort of perspective on all this? So I found a Facebook group called Wisconsin Wake Surf Alliance. And I just reached out and I said, we're doing this story. You know what the other side's saying. Does anybody want to take us out and show us some wake surfing? And I got more offers that I could be wake surfing every weekend this summer if I wanted to. We got a lot of people, but we were actually invited to go out on the water by a man named Drew Jellin and his friends. They took us out on Little Muskego Lake. And Little Muskego is about, I think it's around, if I'm recalling correctly, around 400 or 500 acres. It's a kind of a medium-sized lake, big enough for water sports, but not as big as Pewaukee. And they took us out. It was a relatively quiet morning. There was going to be rain in the forecast, but they took us out. And I got to admit, it was a lot of fun to watch.
I bet it was.
It was a lot of fun. And they invited me to do it. I wasn't dressed for it, but we said, we'll watch you. Yeah. And they talked about how a lot of this has to do with if you're a wake surfer, if you're in a wake boat, a lot of this is being responsible with the way you use the boat. Do you operate near other people? If you see someone who is fishing, do you go buzz past them with big waves? You really shouldn't. Do you repeatedly go through the same area over and over again so that those waves build up? You should limit those kind of passes. And then they're equipped with big speakers on these boats, so you can blast the tunes. And this guy, I mean, if you see the story, you'll see he's a young guy. He's really fit. He does a lot of like hang loose dude kind of symbols. You know, I mean, he kind of has he's got the wake surfing, the surfer dude kind of a vibe, right? And I could see him being a guy who'd want to crank the tunes. And he said, I get it. You've got these boats, these speakers, you want to use them, but be responsible, be respectful of other people. If you're blazing through the lake, making big waves, cranking your tunes, and not caring about anybody else, you're going to get a lot of blowback. Yeah. And he said, so a lot of it is using these things, as they put it, responsibly and sharing the lake with everybody else. So we've gone out with both sides. We've gotten the experience and sort of what does it feel like? And everybody has their own perspective on that. But there is real science behind this. There are studies and research that are looking at what are wake boats and wake surfing doing potentially to the environment and to others, and we're going to talk about some of that science when we come right back. So this is more than just about lake enjoyment. There is research into the effect on lake health. And the first study we're going to talk about is one that was done by the University of Minnesota, St. Anthony Falls Laboratory in 2022. They, and it's hard for me to explain how, because I don't really understand how they went through measuring this, but they set up all sorts of measurement stations and they tested wake boats. They tested four different wake boats, or four different boats, I should say. 2 wake boats, 2 I guess non-wake boats, like traditional
Other
ski
styles,
boats.
yeah.
Sure.
And I'll talk about that a little bit later. There's some opponents of this study, the wake surfing supporters are critical of some of the choices that they made, but they had a really big, like a 24-foot wake boat, the biggest and heaviest of all, that they put 4 people in. And then they had a second size of wake boat, and then they had another boat, and then the oldest and smallest of the ski boats that they only had 2 people riding in. So varying sizes and types of boats. And they tested to see how much height, energy, and power the waves had. And they measured those waves 100 feet away from the boat, and then at distances, increments of 100 feet all the way out to 700, I believe it was. And they wanted to see how do the waves compare to, so if you say, all right, all these boats make waves. Ski boats have been around forever. They make waves. They wanted to see just how much stronger and taller are the waves from the wake boats. And at 100 feet away from the boat, the wake boat waves were, I think, of the biggest boat they tested, were 3 to 9 times stronger, had more energy than the ski boats. But that's just 100 feet away. What's going on farther away from the boat is the real question, because how much energy do these waves retain? And that study found that at 500 feet after it's left the sort of path of the boat itself, the wake boat waves had 3 times roughly more energy than the traditional ski boat. So now you're 500 feet away, there's 3 times the energy. I believe they were about twice the height. And then, power is another sort of combination of all of that. But bottom line, they're stronger, more powerful waves, according to this study. That's just what might be affecting the shoreline or other users, right? So if you go down, you're 200 feet away from shore thinking I'm a safe distance, and there's all that energy hitting the shoreline, that's where you see the child on the slide and the stuff happening. But the wake boat supporters would say the way they did this, they studied the worst case scenario. They studied the biggest, heaviest boat in the worst of conditions, essentially making the tallest wave possible. And most wake boats aren't like that. They said most wake boats don't create waves nearly that powerful or that much energy. So they're kind of testing for the worst case scenario and saying we want to ban all other wake boats. That would be what some of those critics would say. But it's not just the shoreline concern. There's the underneath stuff.
Did that study look into that as well, or was it a different one?
University of Minnesota did not. So Carroll University in Waukesha actually worked with some others in studying North Lake. The North Lake Management District actually commissioned this study. I believe this was also in 2022. There have been multiple iterations of that study, but the one that I'm going to refer to was also in 2022. And they looked at the impact of that, the prop wash, they call it, the energy that's coming out of the back of the boat and then is hitting, because they're at an angle, the energy that's hitting potentially the lake floor. In shallower waters, you obviously have more of a concern. In deep water, there's no concern. And for wake surfers, deep water is better. that doesn't mean they don't pass over shallow areas,
Right.
or that you don't have inexperienced people who might be going out and not really thinking about where they are.
Right.
We saw that on Pewaukee Lake, by the way. We saw
I'm sure.
a wake surfer on the shallow side in 8 feet of water who's going around, and they're not getting great waves, and maybe they don't know why. But they're also potentially doing damage to the lake bottom there. What this study found was that they could see impacts on the lake bottom at depths up to 20 feet or even greater. So according to that study, they were seeing a churning of that lake bottom, an increase in phosphorus in the water that was tested 30 minutes after the boat had passed. And so they're raising the concerns that that is stirring up that lake bottom and could impact, aquatic life and other things. Where the critics, or I should say the wake surfers come in, though, they look at this and they say they're finding that there's this impact in the short term, but long-term research has yet to show there's been any actual ecological damage. Over the 15 years that wake boats have been around, the different sort of ways they measure lake health in Wisconsin, the DNR tracks some of these different things that are in the water and the water clarity and things like that. There's been virtually no change on most of these lakes over that period. They say if what these research studies were saying is true, that they could cause all this damage, why aren't we seeing it?
Could it be because they're just now becoming more popular, or because it could be something that's growing over time?
I mean, I think it could be something we see. I think what they're really getting at, the wake surfing supporters are saying, is there needs to be more research into the actual effects, as opposed to we're measuring wave energy, we're measuring what it does, or how much is reaching the lake bottom. But is there in fact a long-term impact? Is there something that is going to cause real ecological damage, or is this theoretical? And I think both sides are kind of critiquing the other and saying, well, if you talk to the Lakes at Stake folks, they say that University of Minnesota study is the standard bearer that proves that this is causing real problems, and that they need to keep these boats far away from the lakeshore and from other boats. If you talk to the wake surfing community, they'll say that's overblown. It's theoretical. They chose poorly when they tested certain boats. The boating industry has its own research, actually. There was a study that was done around the same time that used something called computational thermodynamics. So instead of, like the university studies have done, instead of going out and actually measuring waves in the water, they actually did some computer simulations using fluid dynamics, which I might have said fluid dynamics, which I know nothing about, by the way. It's way over my head. But they had their own science, and they came to the conclusion that 200 feet from shore was adequate to minimize any environmental impact. And they said any impact that there was on the shoreline was essentially equivalent to natural winds of 20 miles per hour, which is not entirely uncommon. That happens in Wisconsin. So they said the wind effects are no worse, or no, these are no worse or no better than the wind effects. Now, that study was, the authors of that study, if you look at it, 2 of the 3 authors work for Mercury Marine in Fond du Lac, which makes boat engines. So this is the industry and kind of their science. If you look at the University of Minnesota study, it was largely funded by and crowdfunded by environmental groups that are concerned about lake health. So we now have competing studies that are saying opposite things, but they're kind of supporting the preconceived notions, you might say, of the groups that are pushing for them. So there is some discussion about whether or not there should be some sort of a more independent study, or something where all the sides come together to help design one study. And there has actually been some effort to get the University of Wisconsin to do that. I don't think that has gone anywhere yet, but there actually was legislation introduced just this last year that would have directed the university to do this kind of study, where they could design something that everyone would be satisfied with and could tell us, are these wake boats going to cause this kind of damage? And are there ways that they can be restricted to limit that damage?
Well, and I think, and you talked about it in your story too, but seeing them each side kind of criticize the other, do you think that there's a way, and maybe we talk about this, a little bit later in the podcast, but is there a way, do you think, that everyone can just kind of get along and be okay with the other side?
Well, it's funny. I asked that question of one of the people. If you watch the story, I asked one of the guys from Lakes at Stake that question. Hans Myers, his name's a lifelong sailor, lives on Pewaukee Lake. And I said, is there a way for everybody's got to play in the same sandbox here, right? And I said, is there a way for everybody to get along? And he laughed and he said, oh, absolutely not. And I think he was saying that tongue in cheek. I think there is, the question is, it's coming to what is that compromise? Because I don't think wake boats are going away. I mean, they're profitable for the industry. And I told you guys before we got started, I rode along with these guys wake surfing, and it looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And even the lakes at stake, people say it does look like fun. And these are probably great people doing it. It's not a character assassination. They're concerned about the impact it's having.
Right.
Can everybody share the lakes in a way that everyone's happy with? And I think each side has their vision of what that should look like, and those two sides are not together at this point. They're a long way, I think, from agreeing on what that should look like.
So we've got these two sides here. Kind of reminds me of politics, right? The politicians are often on different sides
Absolutely.
of the issues.
Yeah.
Is that happening already?
Well, it is. And in fact, there is a race right now to regulate wake boats in Wisconsin. And when I say a race, each side is trying to get a standard in place before the other does,
Before the other
because
ones,
it's going to set things for years to come. And we're going to talk about that race and what's happening all across the state of Wisconsin when we come right back. So, as wake surfing enthusiasts conflict with fishermen and other more traditional lake users, there's a growing battle in Wisconsin over how to regulate wake boats. Everyone agrees there should be some sort of regulation, that there needs to be something in place that says, here's how they should be used. In Wisconsin right now, under current law, there's nothing about wake boats in the law. They're too new for that. But there is a restriction that you can't use a motorboat in any kind of form that creates a wake closer to than 100 feet from the shoreline. So that's already sort of in place for ski boats and other boats of any kind. And you can't use a motorized boat that creates a wake on a lake smaller than 50 acres. That's already in the law. But both sides agree that's probably not enough for wake boats. Even the wake surfing and the water sports industry, the industry supporters say, we agree there should be something more. But they want to get something in place that they're satisfied with before the other side makes it much worse in their view. So in November, a couple of state lawmakers, Senator Mary Felkowski, who I believe is from Tomahawk, and Representative Rob Swearingen, who's from Rhinelander. So this is the North Woods, a lot of lakes up there, right? It's a big recreational area. They, at the urging, I believe, and there was some lobbying money in this from the water sports industry and the marine industry, they introduced, I should say, a bill in the state legislature that would have set a limit of 200 feet from the shoreline and from other boats, that wake boats have to stay when they're in wake surfing mode, which is that plowing through the water, creating the waves. They have to be 200 feet from the shoreline and from other boats. Their legislation did two other things, though, that wake surfing critics are really concerned about. One is that bill would not set any depth restriction. So you could take these wake boats in 5 feet of water,
Gotcha.
not a problem. And also, they would, and this is a big one, that law would then invalidate any other ordinances around the state that are stricter than the state law.
Gotcha.
There are ordinances at lakes and in lake districts and in small towns, especially across the North Woods. The first one in Wisconsin, I didn't talk about this in the story that aired. The first one in Wisconsin was actually in Mequon-Thiensville. The river there, that river bend, it was a popular area for water skiers.
Boats go constantly.
Definitely.
Had become a very popular area for wake boaters and wake surfers as well. And 10 years ago, they put in an ordinance that said no wake boats here. They're concerned about what it was doing to that area of the river. But up north in Vilas County in particular, there's a lot of, in Sawyer County, all over the place, there are a lot of towns and lake districts that are adding their own restrictions. Maybe it's 700 feet. Maybe it's no wake boats at all. Maybe it's no wake boats unless the lake is larger than 1,500 acres or in this sort of depth. But it's a patchwork.
Sure.
So it's complicated because, number one, as a lake user, what's the rule here versus there versus somewhere else? And for law enforcement, DNR and others, if they're enforcing these things, what are the regulations from town to town and place to place? So even some wake surfing critics say the way it is with these local ordinances is a mess and isn't the way it should be. But short of what they want, they'd rather have the option. This bill from the industry, this bill from Senator Felkowski and Representative Swearingen would have said those ordinances are gone. The Mequon-Thiensville wake boat ban, gone, would have been eliminated. Wake boats would be able to come back. So in January, I think it was, Lakes at Stake and others got Senator, I think it was Andre Jacques, and Representative Christine Sinicki. One Republican, one Democrat, a bipartisan bill. They got a bill together that would have set a limit of 700 feet from shore and other lake users and would have required wake boats to be in at least 20 feet of water. And this is the biggest piece. It would have also said no wake boats on lakes smaller than 1,500 acres. We looked at the DNR's data on lakes in Wisconsin. there are more than 2,000 lakes of at least 50 acres where you can take a motorized boat. 2,000. I think it might have been 2,700. It was a lot of them. If you go to 1,500 acres, there are 77 lakes across the entire state of Wisconsin that would be able to accommodate wake boats. So first of all, if you own a wake boat, you go, wait a minute, that's a huge restriction. But secondly, and this is a concern for some of the people like on Pewaukee
live
Lake.
there.
Yeah.
You're on Pewaukee Lake, which is 1,500 acres or more. All
of
the
them are
wake
gonna
boats
flood
are
in.
coming
Yeah.
to your lake now.
Yeah.
So even for wake boat critics, that restriction has sort of a potentially negative side effect on the bigger lakes because there would be a heavy concentration of wake boats on those bigger lakes. But that's what they want. They want to they say whether or not we think that's the best idea on the bigger lakes in terms of ecological health, they believe 1,500 acres should be the minimum. So you've got these two competing bills, and then the legislative session ended.
Cool.
So here we are. So now we're in boating season, and there is
there
no,
is no-
legislature to sit down and meet and go over all of this. So both sides are ramping up their campaigns to win public support and to get legislative support going into the next session, and then try to get something done in 2025.
Well, and remind me of his name, the wakeboating guy you were.
Drew Gellin?
Drew.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that also kind of made me chuckle when you were talking about trying to limit the wake boats to the 1,500 acres or more, and his response was,
right away.
I move.
Immediate.
Yeah.
It's like when people say if a politician wins a certain race, they say, I'm going to move, I'm going to go to Canada. He said, I would
Absolutely.
move.
And he said it like 3 times.
But he followed it up. He said, but I mean it though. I have to be on the water. And it's his business.
Right.
He
Right.
makes
Yes.
custom wakeboards. He takes people out and does wakeboarding events and things. He goes out of state to a lot of things. But so he could boat anywhere.
Yeah.
And so if Wisconsin gets that restrictive, he's not going to stay here. And I don't think that was an idle threat. I think for him that was real.
No,
I think it would ruin his business.
Right.
So he would go somewhere else. Are the
What about other
critics,
states, though?
Well,
Right.
that's a great
Oh, yeah.
question. No one else yet has what Lakes at Stake wants here. No one has a 700-foot restriction. That is what they're asking for. There are 4 states in the Southeast. I think it is, I'm going to go off the top of my head, is Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and South Carolina that each have some form of a 200-foot restriction. I believe in Georgia, there are only 4 lakes that actually even qualify. And then they're man-made lakes that are managed by the Army Corps there.
Sure.
But in any case, those 4 states have a 200-foot restriction, which is what the industry wants. But those are not, they're not Wisconsin. They don't have the kind of water we have here. Then Maine, you go completely way up north, the far northeast corner of the country. Maine set a 300-foot limit. I think wake boat critics wanted more and the industry wanted less, and they compromised and went with 300 feet. New Hampshire just last month in May, this wasn't a state law, it's a state regulation, but their version of the Department of Natural Resources, I forget what exactly it's called, conservation something or other, they implemented a 500-foot restriction, which is the most strict in the country right now in terms of a statewide rule, regulation, or law. But that 500 feet, Lakes at Stake says that's the minimum. That's the minimum. They want 700. And they say a lot of eyes are on Wisconsin right now. Minnesota has no restriction.
I was going to say, what are they doing over
Michigan
there?
has no restriction.
Okay.
There are other states that are looking at Wisconsin going, if Wisconsin sets the standard for the the lake heavy northern Midwest,
yeah.
that could be the standard.
follow
So
up.
there's a lot of attention from the water sports industry. The Water Sports Industry Association put some money into lobbying here. National marine manufacturers are fighting for something that's more friendly to wake surfers. And then you've got a lot of these environmental groups and a lot of people up north in northern Wisconsin who are pressuring the Board of Natural Resources to do something about this and get something in place statewide here in Wisconsin. It's up in the air right now, but there is certainly an effort for each side to try to get what they want in place. In the end, do they compromise on 300 or 400 or something like that? Do they set a depth restriction of 10 or 20 or whatever feet? Maybe. I guess that remains to be seen, but I think right now they are maybe not miles apart, but they're certainly hundreds of feet apart.
So in the meantime, do these lake districts and communities continue to, implement new rules, or are they kind of waiting for the state?
No, there's a lot of places where every week there's another place that's considering or has something on the agenda to talk about one of these. And I know these groups are lining up. In fact, some of the people I interviewed from the Wisconsin Wake Surf Alliance, they're trying to get their act together. They say they've been behind the game here. They feel like they got left behind by the environmental groups and the wake boat critics who have been much more organized and gotten their message out. And they say, we're playing catch up right now. And that shows when you look at surveys. The Wisconsin,
public feedback,
the Wisconsin Conservation Congress actually does surveys where they ask the public about various things, policies they might like to see in place and try to get their feedback. And I think there were 40 or 50 questions this year on the spring survey in 2024. Question 43 asked if the people taking the survey, if the public wants a 700-foot restriction, a 20-foot depth limit, and 1,500-acre limit for wake boats. More than 13,000 Wisconsin residents offered an opinion on that. There are a few that replied that gave no opinion. I don't know why you'd reply at all. Maybe they didn't answer that question. Of the 13,000 that had an answer, 75% said yes, they support these restrictions. So for wake surfing supporters, they go, we have work to do.
Yeah.
Because if you're a lawmaker and you look at a 75% issue, that's influential. And just a couple of years ago, some of these questions were 90%. So the wake surfing supporters, the water sports industry, they're making inroads, but it's still overwhelmingly right now the public support is in favor of restricting these and restricting them severely. Where that goes, like I said, we'll have to wait and see. But in the meantime, as you asked, Jenna, there's a lot of effort at the local level to get some of these ordinances in place.
Well, now the legislative the session has ended. So
Easy for you to say.
Legislative. And so now what? So now we just wait.
Well,
right?
throughout the summer, and I would say that while there are these local efforts being made, the water sports industry also recognizes, because this is a matter of public perception and feedback, they're really advocating strongly for sort of voluntarily responsible behavior with wake boats. So they're putting out messaging at boat launches and in all sorts of other places that say, number one, stay 200 feet away. It may not be the law yet. Stay 200 feet away because there's no need to cause unnecessary disruptions. Number two, they say, don't make repeated passes over and over in the same area because the cumulative effects make the waves worse. So go, for a little while in one area, then maybe head somewhere else to give that place a break. And finally, they say, just keep the music down. I know you got big speakers, be respectful of others. They seem to recognize that the image right now is as important as anything else. Yep. Being responsible will go a long way toward not angering your neighbors and making other lake users come out and say, we've got to do something about this. So really, that's what's going on right now. We've got a summer in Wisconsin where everybody's got to find a way to get along.
Right.
And I think that's a good time for us to go off the record, which we will do when we come right back. It is time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering a question for which we have not prepared, but you know who has because she's here with her question.
It's me.
Sarah Smith.
Gosh, I love food questions. They're just the great divider. Today we're gonna create the perfect sandwich.
I like how you have this organized with your little sticky notes.
There's every time I think of a question, I write it on my little Post-it notes. Okay.
Right.
So we're gonna create the perfect sandwich. What in your mind makes the perfect sandwich? Like you bite into it and you're like, hooey mama. That's good.
Not to sound like a stereotypical 30-something-year-old woman, but like avocado and tomato, those really fresh ingredients. That makes it like an extra special sandwich for me.
What's your favorite bread?
My favorite bread? I like sourdough. I like French bread.
Yeah.
If I'm making like my perfect sandwich and not my healthy sandwich, those would be the ones.
I think the bread goes a long way toward making a sandwich a great sandwich. And I think if you've got like a bread,
like hearty,
it's,
right?
well, it's a bread that's got kind of a toasty, sort of a crunchy outer, but then soft inside.
In the middle, yeah.
I was just visiting my daughter up north last weekend, and we went somewhere. I can't even remember the name of the place, but it was kind of like bar food. Yeah. And so I wasn't expecting a great deal, and I had some sort of it was like a mac and not mac and cheese, like a grilled cheese type thing, but I think it had avocado actually, and it had this bread that was about like a half-inch thick, and it was toasted real nice, but kind of buttered inside, not healthy at all.
Nah.
And then so you've got that, but it's also got to have cheese.
Yes,
it's got to, and usually
it's got to
have. No, it's got to have cheese, but I think it's got to have more than one kind of cheese. Like a couple of cheeses blended.
Okay.
Melted.
Yeah, melted. Yeah,
melted cheese.
Yeah, I could take I love cheese, and gosh, they're probably gonna take my
a
Wisconsin
perfect
card.
Sandwich doesn't have to have cheese.
I don't need cheese. It's not a make or break, but it's got to have mayo. It's got to have some sort of sauce or something to make it not
like a mayo or a mustard, something like that.
Ooh,
For
maybe
sure.
Mixed.
I agree with the condiments, and
Yes.
I've really gone more toward like the stone ground mustards and
Ooh,
things
yeah.
like that. Something
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
got a little bit of spice
I've
to it.
matured in my mustard
Yeah,
life.
yeah. So yellow mustard, not enough
No.
anymore.
No.
And honey mustard, too sweet. Maybe this right sandwich
Agreed.
could be, but
Dijon?
So we're putting it together here. Avocado,
Yeah.
some stone ground mustard,
Yes.
a couple of melted cheeses. Maybe.
What do you put on for crunch? Because you got to have the crunch too.
Well, to me, that's where that bread, if it's got the right.
Okay,
crunch.
but like,
You think something else in
I
there?
don't know.
I like Brussels sprouts. They do that at Jimmy John's, and I love it.
I like
Not
Brussels
Brussels
sprouts.
sprouts.
but
I'm
not-
sorry, I said
Oh.
it wrong. Not Brussels
No,
sprouts.
with
the
sprouts.
little sprout.
Yeah, the sprouts,
yeah.
not Brussels sprouts.
They
Just
do
the
that
regular
at Jimmy
sprouts.
John's. You're right.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's really
Yeah.
good.
I do
Yeah,
like
could you
the
imagine
sprouts.
my perfect sandwich has Brussels
well,
sprouts
but
on
no
it.
shape.
For
Brussels
sure.
sprouts
Those
might
are good
be.
too.
I mean,
No.
like,
I'm not against Brussels sprouts, not on a sandwich, but even those sprouts, I don't know if that's my perfect sandwich. They're fine, but I wouldn't put them on.
I know. I don't like lettuce in my sandwich. I don't like that crunch.
The
So
lettuce
I'm a
crunch.
little weird that way.
If
Okay.
I want crunch, I'll tell you what. If we're talking the perfect sandwich, I said it didn't have to be healthy, right?
no.
Sure.
It's crispy bacon. That's my crunch.
Dang. Yeah,
Crispy
that's
bacon.
good. Okay.
Have you ever though? And I don't know if this would be in the perfect sandwich. Have you ever just thrown potato chips on a sandwich?
yeah, I
because
did.
it gives you that crunch.
Yes.
Yeah. That's again. Now we've got cheese and potato chips and bacon.
We're going downhill.
Avocado, bacon.
Also, it comes with a side of angioplasty, but
Details. What about meat? What's your like best deli? Like you go to somewhere and you get a sandwich. What
I
kind of
feel
meat?
boring. I like turkey. I like
I
chicken.
kind of do too.
Yeah, I'm fair. Yeah,
I like
that's fair.
actually one of my favorites from the grocery store is they have a it's not Chipotle, but it's a seasoned, it's sort of like a seasoned chicken or something that's been
Okay.
marinated or whatever, but it's got a little bit of a maybe buffalo, I don't know, I'm trying to think of what it would be, but it's got a little bit of flavor to it, so like a seasoned
already,
marinated
yes.
slice. So yeah, I mean, I like I like seasonings, I like flavoring. Yeah.
Do you know what else is good? Have you ever been to Herbert's and Gerbert's?
Herbs and Gerbs.
That
when I
was big in
college,
Green
though.
Bay when I
Yeah,
lived there.
that's what I was gonna
But
say.
they take out the bread. They call it the guts.
Yes.
And they put
they're
it on.
filling
give it
in,
to you.
yeah.
It does. They give you a little stack of bread on top of your
So
sandwich.
good.
That was
Yeah.
excellent.
Do you know what that reminds me of, by the way, is because we had meatball sandwiches at home the other day and we kind of like dug them out
yes.
for that. But did you ever see Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield?
If I did it, it was a
Okay,
long time
so
ago.
he plays this sort of bombastic rich guy, right? And he doesn't care about, he has no couth. He's at a party and his wife's trying to impress all these people, all the hoity-toities, and he goes in and he finds these giant pieces of bread and he just scoops them all out and he just fills it with other stuff at the table and just crams it together. And whenever I hear about scooping it out, I think of that scene from Back to School because it's just an obnoxiously large sandwich.
Amount, yeah.
And he had to make room by scooping out the bread.
Yeah.
Or like a pretzel bun. We have lots of
Would you
those.
treat yourself? Yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting.
The perfect burger, I think, has a pretzel bun.
Yes, because it withstands all the juice from the burger and it soaks it up and it doesn't become soggy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's
Lindsay, do you have access to a mic? Lindsay's switching
do.
today. Okay, so now that you've heard all of our sandwich toppings, what do you think?
Okay, I'm pescatarian, so typically I go for a tuna sandwich.
That's fair. Okay.
And I feel like the fresh crunch you were talking about, I think probably like lettuce, like a nice crispy lettuce.
Like romaine has a
Yeah.
really solid crunch.
Yeah, that's
And
so good.
I love a good raw red onion.
Lindsay, I'm a dumb guy who needs an education. You said pescatarian? Is that
Pescatarian.
fish?
It's fish, yeah.
Fish is okay.
Yeah.
So not other meats, but fish.
I'm mainly like vegetarian, but I eat fish like maybe once a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dairy? The dairy's so not vegan. You still have
I'm
dairy?
not vegan. I am lactose intolerant.
Oh,
though.
well, okay. So that limits
So
some
no
things. Yeah.
cheese.
Okay. All
So I
right.
try and stay away from like cheese. But I love mayo. I'm with you, Sarah.
Yum.
Yeah,
Hey,
mayo.
there's just something, and then like you get like a good garlic aioli. But anyway,
I just saw something the other day. Maybe might have even been this morning. I saw it probably on TikTok or somewhere. Somebody saying that the greatest rebrand of all time has been mayo into aioli.
Yeah.
every time because my husband will be looking at a menu and he's like, "What the heck is aioli?" I was like, "Mayo."
Yeah, but
Fancy.
flavored,
It's
got a little
flavored
extra.
fancy mayo. Yeah,
Yeah.
like a Chipotle aioli. I'd feel like, oh, this is good. It's not mayo. It's
Man,
good. Yeah.
Cafe Hollander, shout out, man. You get the dips with
They
the
got the
fries.
dips
So good.
there.
Man,
Yeah.
and there's so many choices where I was like one of each, but man, the garlic aioli.
That's
mwah.
such good stuff.
Why do we
Slaps.
do this at 10 o'clock in the morning? Because now I
Now
feel
I'm
like I need to
starving,
go to
and my
Hollander
lunch
and have some lunch.
blows.
I'm trying to keep track of our time. Do we have any idea where? I think we're at around
that
40.
time.
We're getting really close. Okay. All right.
think.
We're going to come back. We'll take one more break. We'll wrap things up when we come right back.
Contact 6 is standing up for you, handling hundreds of disputes every year.
Whether it's $30 or more than $30,000,
Contact 6.
Contact 6.
Contact 6 is here to fight for your rights.
Getting answers,
The next day, I got a response.
getting results.
Within a matter of 48 hours, I had
a decision.
Making a difference.
I'm just grateful beyond words for the service that you provide.
Contact 6 because you matter.
Well, if you have a topic you would like us to discuss on Open Record or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News or want to describe your perfect sandwich, let us know. Send an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. Sarah, Jenna, thank you.
Sure, of course.
As always, thank you to the people who make this podcast possible, including our executive producer, Sarah Smith, our editor, Dave Machuda, and our chief photographer, manning the video switcher. Not today, it's Lindsay who's manning the video switcher. Thank you to you, Lindsay. And with that, I'm Brian Polson. We'll be back next week.